My contention is that Google Earth is somehow programmed to be absolutely accurate over very short distances, like across cities and towns in the alleged southern hemisphere, but is clearly fudging numbers over long distances to make reality seem to fit into their fantasy. I have a theory on how they may be doing this. I put the grid lines on Google Earth to show the yellow Tropic of Capricorn. Keep in mind that yellow line looks curved to represent 3D around an alleged globe, but it represents a dead straight line east to west across Australia at the tropic, and then did a detailed zoom in west coast to east coast measurement of the tropic across Australia. But as I used the measuring tool, it didn't follow the yellow tropic line straight across as I asked it to. It drew that red line south of the tropic and said 2,346 miles across. Same starting and ending points precisely, but just as we discussed on a globe, the farther south you measure across the same longitude lines, the longitude lines are converging closer together to get shorter apart further south. So that red line is shorter than the yellow tropic line, since it is measuring 100 miles south of the Tropic of Capricorn. But I didn't ask it to measure that red line. I asked it to measure that yellow line, and it drew and measured in that red line, claiming that distance is only 2,346 miles across to match the converging globe longitudes, whereas Gleason's map would put that yellow line distance at 3,202 miles across. Preposterous, you say. That's 36% larger. That's exactly what Captain Brown said when he learned his actual physical sailing distances were the same versus the globe distance claims of his day. And just like all the engineering projects, when reality doesn't match the globe model, it's not looking good for Fantasy Island. Gleason's map itself is based on almanac coordinates and land maps of his day, and as he said, and I'll show you, nobody has ever been past 78 or 80 degrees south latitude. His map is stopping at 90 degrees south only because the globe latitude-longitude grid system demands there are 180 degrees of latitude down a longitude line from the North Pole to the South Pole or ice wall edge. That's where the system comes from. All the great ancient mariner nations came from that yellow 45-degree north circle, and noticed from that circle they all saw Polaris, the North Star, at 45 degrees altitude north in the sky every night, and all saw the sun at 45 degrees altitude at solar noon on the March 21st and September 21st equinoxes, like this. So they stuck the equator ring there and then just assumed that distance must double equally, since colonies out there were also charting the sun at 45 degrees north on March 21st and September 21st equinoxes. So they knew that distance to the equator was equal to the yellow 45-degree ring to the equator. So they just assumed there must be one more going out, and that must be the South Pole or edge of the Earth, even though nobody had ever even been out there to make certain. In reality, the sun never leaves the ecliptic belt between the green Cancer and blue Capricorn rings, but the ice could go on for who knows how much farther than 90 degrees south. The concept of 90 degrees south is a Newtonian physics globe theory and assumption, not a proven fact. Speaking of, let's take a modern look at the actual flights for the bogus final experiment itself. This is their body cam footage of their flight from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier. You can see this is a Boeing 757-200 series by the unique bent-up wingtip and those three triangular pieces there. Just like here on another Boeing 757-200 series. You can see from the website here that is indeed the airplane used from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier. The Boeing 757-200 series is designed with an optimal cruising speed, not top speed of Mach 0.8 or 593 miles per hour. The obvious and familiar problem is, according to Google Earth, from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier is only 1,876 miles. Yet their flight and all of the others using that same plane take 4 hours and 15 minutes, which would mean on a globe that plane was only averaging 441 miles per hour when it is built to cruise at 593 miles per hour, 152 miles per hour faster. Obviously, there is takeoff and landing to consider, but there is zero reason an airline would slow down to a turtle crawl and then take an extra hour to make a flight it could make in just over 3 hours at its normal cruising speed. 593 miles per hour times 4.25 hours is 2,520 miles. That's 644 miles maximum. They should have overshot Union Glacier, nearly reaching the alleged South Pole. But take your pick, allowing for slower takeoff and landing speeds. 500 miles there, 400 miles there. That's still too far. Many people have questioned if they were 200% certain they were really brought there. I have to assume they brought GPS gear and all verified each other. You do have to find it strange to put a tourist destination in a dangerous glacier range out in the middle of frickin' nowhere with deadly crevasses all around so you can't explore, and if there is a medical emergency, there isn't another base around for 350 miles to helicopter airlift you to, when there are 17 international bases up there on that peninsula. But here's where it gets interesting. As I showed you, that plane could have flown 2,520 miles in 4 hours and 15 minutes just at its normal cruising speed, and they can fly much faster and farther if needed, but let's assume they didn't. Again, the Gleason map is a semi-projection longitude and sun time calculator, not geometrically in scale. So you can't just measure that yellow dotted line across from Punta Arenas Airport to Union Glacier and get an exact figure. That latitude is constant, but the longitude is constantly changing. You can't measure a third side of a triangle where one of the other sides is 6 inches and the second side is changing from 6 inches to 12 inches along the way without advanced ratio trigonometry and multiple other points. But what you can do is take the 11.67 degrees of longitude between the airport and Union Glacier, and you see 11.67 longitude degrees would be 1,283 miles going straight west of the airport's latitude and 1,526 miles going along Union Glacier's latitude. But you have to figure in the 1,845 miles of latitude distance between them. But the plane doesn't fly west like this and then south like that, or south like this and then west like that. It's covering both latitude and longitude at the same time, or rather taking a shortcut. Suddenly, 2,520 miles starts to look a lot more reasonable on the Gleason map than overshooting Union Glacier by 400 to 644 miles. Again, these planes can fly faster, and since we don't know how fast they actually flew, I can't call it definitive, but it's just one more data set not in the globe's or Fantasy Island's favor, light in the sky or not. In my opinion, if you want a real final experiment, 2 sailing yachts take off from New Zealand at the same port, one southeast, one southwest, both maintaining the same average speed or as close as possible. When they get down or out to 50 south latitude, the yellow ring on either model, no polar seas, no ice, no compass anomalies, nada, just smooth sailing, they each carry on that bearing and will meet each other on the other side. Even if either one of them gets a day or 4 or 5 of terrible weather or winds, the globe says that is 16,038 miles around 50 south latitude. So they should meet somewhere around there after only 8,019 miles. The Gleason map says 50 south latitude would be 38,804 miles around, meeting over there on the other side after 19,402 miles, more than 2.25 times as far and long to travel than the globe. Just like the steamship records we just discussed, and the documented Antarctic expeditions from the 1580s to 1890s we haven't discussed yet, but that's none of my business. Either way, that's more than double as long as each other, and easy to figure out their average agreed knots per hour. Even taking a cruising yacht from its usual 30 miles per hour down to a crawl at 20 miles per hour, that's 40.5 days to meet in the middle on the Gleason map. Yeah, exactly half that, but probably just a coincidence. And only 16.75 days on the globe. Even with bad weather, that would be definitive either way and prove or disprove Fantasy Island. Speaking of, there is a very curious thing that despite all of these Antarctic bases, plus more not shown here, with the exception of Ruskaya there are not nor have there ever been any bases along this entire stretch and bulge of Fantasy Island, from about 125 west longitude down to about 165 west longitude on the globe Fantasy Island, and even more, 125 west to 180 west on the Gleason map until it crosses the international date line and east-west longitude divider. More curious is that while Fantasy Island has 125 to 165 west longitude bulging out into the Arctic Ocean, it's the one place on the entire ice wall around the Earth that Gleason has the ice wall indenting inwards past the 75 south latitude ring and even 80 south latitude ring, away from the Arctic Ocean, not bulging out into it, as we'll get into in the sunlight section. But even more curious is when we look at this same exact 125 to 165 west longitude range in the northern hemisphere, the Bering Strait, and the mysterious international date line. Allegedly, the most eastern part of Russia and the most western part of Alaska meet at that red line, divided by water with two islands in the middle called the Bering Strait. It's alleged to only be 53 miles from Russia to Alaska there, and about 20 miles from either side to the islands between them, which are only a few miles away from each other, and yet the international date line runs right through the middle of those two islands and claims there is a 1 day plus 3 hour time difference between those few miles between those two tiny islands. You can understand the 24 hours because they have to divide the dates somewhere for international commerce, but where does the extra 3 hour difference come from? That's the difference between the red, yellow, and green time zones across most of the United States. So how does that work between two islands only a few miles apart? Well, on a globe, you have to convince everyone that all of this yellow diverging or expanding land and water outside of the equator fits equally on the bottom of a converging globe, as only this much yellow fits on its equal top of that globe. So somewhere, you need black magic to make people think that this is the same size as that. Isn't it obvious? And hope most people are too stupid to figure it out, which they are. And as it turns out, black magic is actually as simply stupid as this. Time works based on the smooth, predictable cycles of the sun between the tropics over the sacred ecliptic S-shaped sine wave. So there you go. You've probably noticed they cleverly hide this by just cutting all world maps off in half right exactly there between eastern Russia and western Alaska and keep them on opposite sides from each other and just hope you don't ask questions like, hey, if the distance from eastern Russia there to there and then across to western Alaska over there is only 53 miles, as Google Earth says, and even lets me measure it here, and that's New Zealand down there, which Google Earth says is 877.5 miles long, not 53 miles, and yet clearly I could turn New Zealand sideways and move it up here and still not even reach the right side of this map, which shows oceans, not Alaska, which should be kissing it and look like it's almost touching at this scale. How the hell does that work? And the answer is, it doesn't. That's how magic works. It's not real. It's just you don't bother to think how the trick is done to make it seem real. You can't insert 3 hours of fictional longitudinal land that doesn't exist on top of your fake globe and then build actual physical bases on its identical, equally fictional, non-existent longitudinal globe counterpart on the bottom in Scamtarctica. But the real truth might be much darker than that, literally.
The Antarctic can also be unbelievably beautiful, with refracted light causing false suns and moons. With refracted light causing false suns and moons.
It is a perplexing thing that aside from the alleged Amundsen Scott South Pole base there are no bases inside the 80 degrees south latitude ring on either the globe model or outside of it in the blue ring area on the Gleason map ice wall. Which is strange, because even though nobody's ever even been there to prove it, the theoretical geomagnetic South Pole is alleged to be right there inside it. So you would think there would be an international scientific base there studying it. But nope. The closest base is Vostok, outside the ring at 78 degrees 27 minutes south latitude. Even in the Antarctic summer months of November through late January, where there is an alleged 24-hour sun to warm the seas, and both the Ross Ice Shelf and Rana Ice Shelf penetrate well inside the alleged 80 degrees south latitude ring, so icebreaker ships should be able to get in there and explore. In the 1875 to 1889 ninth edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, when you read all of the documented South Polar explorations from 1567 to 1874, when Antarctic sea expeditions were given up completely, not a single expedition was able to get past the enormous insurpassable ice wall they all spoke about at 78 degrees 11 minutes south latitude, meaning inside of the alleged 80-degree polar circle ring. Even outside of 78 degrees, to the Antarctic Circle at 67 degrees south latitude, Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that at the same time as Dumont d'Urville in 1839, Commander Wilkes of the United States expedition made a cruise to the southward and mapped a large tract of land in the latitude of the 67 degrees south Antarctic Circle, for which he claimed the discovery. But as a portion of it had already been seen by Balleny and the rest has since been proven not to exist, the claim has not been admitted. Remarkable, as to this day that ring is still called the Southern Pole of Inaccessibility. What is more curious is that out of all of these expeditions, which all went in the summer southern months for the weather, there is not one single mention of any 24-hour sun in the sky, ever. Plenty of talk of that night, the next morning, the next day, a few days later, but you'd think somebody would mention a 24-hour sun during these months, but it's nowhere to be found. Were the Earth a globe, the longitude lines inside the Antarctic Circle could not exceed more than 30 miles wide per degree due to convergence, which times 360 degrees is only 10,800 miles around the Antarctic Circle. And yet, while the Challenger did not openly admit it had searched for the South Pole in vain, its records showed it sailed over 60,000 miles, the equivalent of 3 times around the alleged globe's circumference at the equator, never mind 5.5 times around the alleged South Polar Circle, and cost the government over $1 million without being able to say that it had been fortunate enough to ascertain the existence of any such wonderful locality. But that's none of my business. And it gets even weirder and more unbelievable when we flash forward to the journals and journeys from the alleged 1912 South Pole expeditions of both the Norwegian Amundsen and England's Captain Robert Falcon Scott. If the whole world is a stage, why would Antarctica be any different?
If you think flat Earth is ridiculous, consider this. A sextant is a navigation tool to measure angles between the horizon and celestial bodies, allowing sailors to find their exact location at sea. The trigonometry required for a sextant only works because the 3 points it measures create flat planes to each other. No adjustments for curvature, ever. If the Earth were a globe, the math wouldn't work. But it does, and the sextant has been used for centuries. Meanwhile, surveyors use laser levels over miles with zero curve correction. Train tracks run level for miles. Airplanes fly at flight levels, not arcs. Pilots calculate distances over a flat plane. And there are places where you can see too far, where the Earth's supposed curvature should hide distant objects below the horizon. And let's be real. Everyone knows the moon landing was fake. With a lie that big, NASA has no credibility, so why trust their story? Everything we build assumes a flat Earth.
To us, it might seem almost a stage awaiting actors.
The Scott Party didn't seem to have that clarity on the part of the leader of recognizing what the strengths and weaknesses of the individual men were.
Robert the Hidden Hand Scott was a career Royal Navy officer who made lieutenant in 1889, then immediately had a scandal where he suddenly disappeared from all naval records for 8 months. Then 2 years later, while commanding a torpedo boat, he accidentally ran it aground and gets into trouble, and then finds out his dad lost all the family fortune and he has no capital, and he has to support the whole extended family himself. So a promotion and the extra income became his main concern, making him a perfect, willing, and desperate dupe for a psyop. Luckily by fluke, Scott runs into the Royal Knighted Sir Clements Markham, president of the Royal Geographic Society, on a street in London, as you do, and the guy decides to put Scott in charge of commanding an expensive South Polar expedition despite zero experience, as you do. And before he even leaves on the first one, King Edward VII, in white Templar crosses, gives Scott a 4th member knighthood of the Royal Victorian Order. Yes, that's the White Knights Templar Malta Cross, who run the world banking commerce copyright law scam for the Vatican and its Holy Roman appointed royal families, for being a distinguished lapdog of the monarchy and Vatican. But the expedition fails, 1 guy dies, half of them get scurvy. He brings back bogus meteorological and magnetic readings that are later criticized as amateurish and inaccurate. And once again, Scott gets his 2nd boat in his career run aground, stuck in the ice, and needs 2 relief ships to come down and save him. So what do? They promote him to the rank of captain. King Edward VII promotes him from 4th member to commander of the Royal Victorian Order, put him in charge as the assistant director of naval intelligence, and then he's hobnobbing with Queen Amelie of Orleans, Luis Felipe, the Prince Royal of Portugal, Sir Henry Keppel, the commander-in-chief of the entire British fleet, and even Prince Heinrich of Prussia. And then they send the guy back for another attempt at the South Pole, despite failing miserably the first time, as you do. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, King Haakon of Norway, seen here, wearing his same Knights of Malta Templar crosses as all the British, has hired Roald Amundsen to do the same and race Scott to the pole. But why this sudden mad rush to reach this alleged South Pole when it was already declared 35 years earlier that it didn't even exist and was pointless and too expensive for governments to keep trying? Before you just take my word for it, ponder this. If you don't have a South Pole, you can't and don't live on a globe, as we've just shown for nearly 2 hours. So here you have the Norwegian and 2 British, the 3 polar stars, as it says on the bottom, the only quote-unquote proof of any South Pole, showing off their globe with their hidden hands. But did they really go to any such alleged South Pole? I am not at all suggesting that these journeys and teams are total fictional fabrications. I'm suggesting these events may have really taken place here, and certain fictional embellishments were added later out of necessity, and I'll show you why. Just what if Gleason was correct and Scott, Shackleton, and Wilson's failed 1901 to 1904 discovery expedition was actually a real South Pole attempt that had to stop at 82 south latitude, not because it wasn't intended to go any further, but because it wasn't possible to go any further. And then Shackleton returns on the Nimrod expedition in 1907 to 1909 and allegedly gets only 97 miles from the alleged South Pole and then just turns around and walks back 750 miles without making world history like the first man on the moon? Or is that a cover story? It should be blatantly obvious on a globe that whether you are Norwegian, English, or even French, like all of the early Antarctic explorers, the cheapest and quickest way to Antarctica, and the alleged South Pole for that matter, would be sailing straight down the Atlantic Ocean directly to the Rana ice shelf and a short march to the alleged South Pole, with no giant mountain range in the way to deal with. Not down there where they all really admittedly went. It would be ludicrous for those expeditions to spend tons of money, time, supplies, and 4 extra unnecessary months sailing through the Mediterranean Sea and the Suez Canal, across the entire Pacific Ocean, past Australia to New Zealand, then go down to the Ross Ice Shelf and make an even longer trek to the alleged South Pole with a huge mountain range in the way to go around. Yet that's exactly the way every single South Polar expedition went in history. Why? Because even the flat earthers have this wrong. The impenetrable barrier, aka ice wall, isn't the coast of the ice circle running around the flat earth plane of inertia, shown here in red, at roughly 67 south latitude. The ice wall is actually inland in the frozen icy water barrier, as Captain Ross told us about, at around 77 to 78 degrees south latitude, shown here in blue. And between the red waterline and blue ice wall are where we find all of the Antarctic bases around the ice shelf to this day, with the exception of the alleged South Pole base, which we'll get into. Scott said, the Great Ice Barrier was sighted and its examination recommenced in 7749 south latitude. The next day, the expedition obtained a latitude of 7810 degrees south, the highest ever reached before or since. Along the coast, as far as the eye could reach to the eastward, there was a perpendicular cliff of ice from 150 to 200 feet high, perfectly level at the top without any fissures or promontories on its seaward face. Captain Ross sailed along the marvelous wall of ice eastward in 7747 south latitude as far as 78 south latitude. This barrier was estimated to be 1,000 feet thick, and it was followed for 450 miles without a break. So the only place you could get on the whole damn thing without an airplane, helicopter, or 200-foot tall hydraulic crane, which didn't exist back then, was the Ross Ice Shelf, which is here in reality. As Gleason said, imagine if you can the amount of centripetal force there must be concentrated to the center of a globe or sphere to hold these mighty walls of ice and mountains of frozen material in place, whereas there is no inward north or outward southern force on the still plane of inertia or rest in the center of a toroidal field. No such proven ice wall also exists around the entire North Pole. Kind of funny how Pangaea forgot to create this ice wall around 77 to 78 north latitude and also left the water and much of the land inside of it unfrozen, unlike its alleged south latitude ring twin, Fantasy Island, which the globe theory just ignores because its model cannot explain or account for this. But the Bible does. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. He has compassed the waters with bounds until day and night come to end, meaning no 24-hour sun or sun at all past 80 degrees south latitude, as we'll get into. Just like all of the other numerous glaring contradictions around Fantasy Island, these two things have one thing in common. Despite similar shapes, they're both just fictional models. So why is the Amundsen Scott base lying about being at the alleged geographical South Pole while 340 miles away in the wrong direction where Amundsen and Scott could have never possibly set foot, fancy sign or not? Easy, because there is no South Pole, because we do not live on a globe. To come full circle, pun intended, in a weird kind of way, dateandtime.info accidentally spilled the beans by giving these coordinates for the alleged Amundsen Scott South Pole Station an alleged actual geographic South Pole. Because while on Fantasy Globe, those coordinates are only 920 feet away and close enough for horseshoes, where we may really live here, it's across the entire world from each other. The globe South Pole would have to be at 90 degrees south latitude and 0 degrees east or west longitude, where the two split at the Greenwich meridian. That's here. 90 degrees south latitude is the outer edge of the ice wall map, and that's 0 east or west longitude at the Greenwich meridian. But date and time's coordinates for the base are all the way over here. 89, 59, 51 south latitude is 920 feet short from the 90-degree outer line, and 139, 166, 22 east longitude is here. Now you realize why before the advent of the airplane and hydraulic crane, all of those early Antarctic expeditions looking to reach 90 degrees south latitude were sailing 40,000 to 60,000 combined miles around this ice circle over several combined expeditions at mostly the Red Ring latitude, looking for a place to get in and just thinking if we live on a globe, we must just be going around this theoretical perimeter and thinking this theoretical continent must be huge, having no modern propaganda reference back then, telling them it should only be 1.5 times bigger around than the United States, or 11,554 miles around, so they could say, hang on a second, something's wrong here. We've gone way too far. Finally, in 1841, Captain Ross found that place, now the Ross Ice Shelf, the only place around the entire red circle ring at roughly 67 south latitude you could get an ice-breaking ship anywhere inside that red coastal circle and anywhere near that blue 78 degrees south latitude ring by ship. and then nobody got past that afterwards because of the huge 1,000-foot thick, 200-foot high, insurmountable ice wall there at the Blue Circle. Yeah, that one. He tried there at that indent where no bases are to this day, but the ice wall stuck straight out of the water that entire stretch. Now you realize why after Captain Ross, the early 1900s South Polar expeditions were all taking these ridiculous and senseless 4-month detour sailing routes all the way around the world to New Zealand and then to the Ross Ice Shelf, when you'd obviously just do this and go straight south on a globe, cut around the coast to the Ross Ice Shelf in less than half the time. But which makes perfect logical sense here, east, the red route, as it's the quickest and only way you could sail to the Ross Ice Shelf from England, France, or Norway and still have known and owned territorial places to stop off and resupply on the way for such a long journey, or risk the much longer blue western route, all the way down the Atlantic Ocean, around South America, and then across the entire Pacific Ocean with nowhere to stop for supplies, as the Panama Canal shortcut through Central America wasn't finished until 1914, 2 years after Scott and Amundsen's alleged final South Polar expeditions. And on the red westward route, you're sailing with the southern roaring 40s westerly winds. And on the blue east route, you're sailing against those winds. Another slap in the face to the cake eaters who falsely claim this map is a globe projection, because from Norway, England, and France, the quickest and cheapest way to 90 degrees south latitude, 0 degrees east-west longitude is clearly the green route around Africa, following the Greenwich Meridian line which leads right to it, not the red route around the world to New Zealand, and a longer hike to pop out 920 feet away through the polar Pac-Man teleport, but they couldn't because they couldn't get their ships anywhere near there, and the ice barrier is blocking the way even if they could. Even to this day, with aircraft and hydraulic cranes, none of these bases there are anywhere near the red 67.5 south latitude sea ice wall, and none of them are any further than the blue 75 south latitude ring. And in fact, with the exception of the alleged Amundsen-Scott South Pole base there, which we've shown to be lying and thus highly suspect and questionable already, not a single base is any further outside of that blue 80 degrees south latitude ring, where the alleged insurmountable ice wall is said to be. There are a few that are close, and what they're all really doing out there could be a whole other film series I don't have time to get into. And while more than a third of these countries' base locations make zero sense when they are on Fantasy Island on a globe, they all make perfect sense when you match them up to the Gleason map. The only one that left me scratching my head was this blue one from Italy to Mario Zucchelli base, the only Italian base, so it should be over there. But then I found out Mario Zucchelli's station is located in an extraterritorial area without any national sovereignty, so from a diplomatic point of view, it falls under the territorial jurisdiction of the Italian embassy in Wellington, New Zealand. And again, there are no bases in that entire stretch we already discussed that indents to the 80 degrees south latitude. Is it just the ice wall, or is there possibly something else stopping them? But first, let's debunk what it certainly isn't, like these flat earther videos going around TikTok claiming it is the dome up above at 13,000 feet coming down.
And this is from 1958, as you can see. Now, we're going to flip to the Antarctica and see what the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1958, before the Antarctic Treaty, says is there. Now, you won't find this in the new encyclopedias because the government's banned them.
False. It was here in the 1960 version as well, after the Antarctic Treaty of 1959.
But what I want you to notice right here is, notice how it says
The flights proved inland areas to be featureless in character, with a dome 13,000 feet high at about latitude 80 degrees south, longitude 90 degrees east. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, let me show you with an image of what the flat earth map would look like. Now, this is what latitude 80 degrees south would look like on a flat earth map. As you can see, the dome comes down closer to you over the wall, which would be about 13,000 feet. Now, if you go back out into the center of the earth, or the North Pole, and try to go up to the firmament with a little bit of calculation, it's going to show that it's about 385,500 feet away. It's really, really simple, folks. Now, if you're not familiar with any of this at all, and you're just now new to all this, you can say, well, this guy's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
In this case, unfortunately, he doesn't. Ice domes are well known in glacier morphology. It's the part of large ice sheets or ice caps that start to pile up in the accumulation zone. This is a picture of one of the many Antarctic domes. Wikipedia says on large enough ice sheets, they can get up to over 9,800 feet tall, which is what this encyclopedia is talking about. The pilot saw a massive glacial ice dome on the ground sticking up 13,000 feet high off the ground, not a dome coming out of the sky down to 13,000 feet altitude. What is interesting is where they saw it, right at about 80 degrees south latitude. You can just barely make one out here, just south of Union Glacier. What is interesting is this base here, Dome Fuji, one of the few bases just short of the alleged 80 degrees south latitude ice wall there in blue. Google Earth has blanked out everything around it. You can only zoom into a gray screen with Google name images all over it. But as you can see, it's at 77.5 degrees south latitude. And we read, Dome Fuji, or Valkyrie Dome, has an altitude of 3,810 meters above sea level. That's 12,500 feet high, and is the second highest summit or ice dome of the East Antarctic ice sheet, probably second to the 13,000-foot one on the encyclopedia that said the pilot saw at 90 degrees east longitude, and represents an ice divide, meaning two separate ice sheets meeting together. Is that what this ice wall is? Is that why they won't show anything under the image? And why would everything come together there around the entire ice ring at 80 degrees south, if so? Gleason had some theories on this, and this brings us back full circle, pun intended, to the sun and the lights, which started this entire film series in the first place, and is where it also shall end. It is no secret that I have a more metaphysical understanding of the earth and luminaries from my esoteric and syncretism studies over the years than the cake eaters and flat earthers' physical theories and models. I will show some other ideas of both, and Gleason himself had a half metaphysical, half cake eater theory to appease the cake eaters.